Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to celebrate the life of our good friend Pat. I wanted to start, first of all, with just a moment of silence. So, if you'd like to say a prayer or a meditation or have a nice thought, then we'll do that now. I wanted to first introduce myself for those that don't know me. If we have family joining us or other friends of Pat's, my name is Jonathan Devich, and friends that I work with and other friends call me Jono. So if you've ever heard of Pat talking about Jono, then I'm that guy. Hopefully, it was all good stuff. Again, thanks everyone for coming together today, and I know it's been challenging for many of us lately with everything going on in the world, and this is just horrible to have to deal with right now. So this will be a little hard to get through, but I felt like this was the right thing to do for Pat and for all of us. So to start, I just wanted to give a little bit of background of on Pat and tell you that he was born on November 28th, 1964, in Park Falls, Wisconsin, and he was the youngest out of six children of Rennie and Judy. When Pat turned 2 years old, the family picked up and moved to Missoula, Montana, where he ended up spending a lot of time with his dad, who was very involved with Little League baseball in town. And Pat went on to play baseball in high school and also football during that time, too. After high school, Pat started going to school there in Missoula, and after some girl trouble that he had, he picked up and moved to Portland to live with his sister Colleen. And while he was there, he started riding bikes more, and he got involved more seriously with the cycling scene. And he ended up becoming a bike messenger there, which lasted for a little bit more than 5 years. And Pat ended up going back to school there and worked his way through school and ended up graduating from the U of O. And that was where U of O is where he really got his love for journalism. And he told me specifically about some professors that he had that really pushed him and taught him a lot and taught him how to tell a story. And we also talked a lot, and I've talked recently with some family and friends about the the work ethic that Pat had with his writing and really digging down deep in stories, and how he really had to have it right. He had to have all the facts. He really supported everyone in cycling, the women's side, the men's side, the juniors, development riders, everyone. If it was a good story, then Pat was on it, and he told it really well. Um, he was also he was a great friend, and we traveled for I think close to 10 years. We traveled together, so you get to learn a lot. So there's a lot of family that I feel like I know you already, and other friends, and that's been really great um, to hear along the way, along the years and travels. And um, so I thought that instead of me just rambling on about my times with Pat, I wanted some others to talk about him and the different sides of Pat, and how with the work he did, which was a huge part of his life and super important to him. I wanted to bring in some others to talk about their interactions with Pat, and how he covered the story, covered cycling, how important things were to him. So our first speaker is going to be Daniel Benson, who is managing editor of Cycling News, and who Pat and myself worked for many years. And we'll hear from Daniel first.
Hi. For those that don't know me, I'm Daniel, and I'm the editor at Cycling News. I'd like to start off by saying how privileged and honoured I am to speak at Pat's memorial. In truth, I feel like a bit of a fraud. Many of you knew Pat for longer than I did. Many of you had stronger bonds and friendships with him, and most of you probably saw Pat more recently. But one element that we can all share is how lucky enough we were to know and spend time with Pat. No matter how fleeting, no matter how short, we can all testify to the lasting impression he made on us. Pat joined the Cycling News team, first as a contributor and then as a full-time member of staff in 2014. Before we'd even spoken, I was well aware of Pat's pedigree as a writer and his standing as a journalist. I knew how well respected he was among his peers, and that he had immense talent as a journalist. To be honest, I was slightly in awe of the guy at first. He seemed to have a contact for everyone in the sport, and the depth of his knowledge was second to none. But Pat operated without ego or arrogance. He was down to earth and always welcoming of new ideas and new faces. He was the perfect teammate. When I recall the times I shared with Pat, I think about the Richmond World Championships in 2015. During that week in the US, he showed me the lay of the land, introduced me to a sea of people I'd never met on the American scene, and he often diffused the naturally stressful environment of the press room with his dry humour and quick wit. We shared beers with Casey and Jono, talked racing with Laura and Kirsten, and that week in Richmond will always bring back good memories for me. I also remember another side of Pat the journalist, who wasn't afraid to ask the tough questions, who worked with integrity and honesty, and was a beacon for independent and impartial journalism. I can remember waking up in the early hours of the UK to text messages from Bradley Wiggins and a horde of ruffled press officers at the Tour of California. When my phone started pinging, I knew that it was because Pat was doing his job and holding people to account. Above all, though, Pat was a great storyteller. It stemmed from his personality and his strong upbringing. He was always fair and just, never treating the stars of the sport any differently to the unproven juniors. And I think that was partly why he was so liked by so many. When he interviewed you, it was because he cared. And when he asked questions and told your story, his love for the sport shone through. It meant that you could quickly spot Pat's work from a mile away. In an age where sensationalism is often encouraged and all too often applauded, Pat provided a timely reminder of how things should be. It's far too early to even think about how the Cycling News team moved forward without Pat by our side. and in truth, there's no way that we can ever replace him. However, I know, and so do those that work closely with him, Laura, Kirsten, Patrick, Daniel, Stephen, Barry, Ellis, Scythe, and Zeb, that Pat will never be far from my thoughts. He taught us lessons in humility and trust, how to be better writers, and how to show patience and fortitude, and how to bring balance and honesty into our everyday lives. Pat may have left us, but his legacy will live on through cycling news for many, many years. In time, when I remember Pat, I'll cherish his work, but most importantly, I'll think of his character and the lasting impressions he made. I'll think about the sunsets he posted, the rides that he took, and I wish that I had one more chance to tell him how much he meant to us. On behalf of everyone at Cycling News and the cycling community as a whole, we'll miss you so much, Pat, but you'll never be forgotten.
Thanks, Daniel. So next, we're going to hear from Team Director Axel Merckx, who can show us a little bit of a different side of working with Pat. Axel?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Hi. Well, unfortunately, as the news came and we found out the major loss that I found out through Cycling News that Pat passed away. First of all, it was a huge shock, but the big sorrow also. Pat has meant a lot for us in the cycling community. He was fair, he was right, he was sometimes harsh maybe, but he was always right. And regardless of if he asks you the tough questions, deep down we do know that Pat was in love with cycling and cared very much for cycling. His knowledge about cycling in general, but domestic cycling in particular, was huge, and it will be very hard to be replaced. I remember meeting Pat for the first time as a freelancer, and then later on as a Cycling News writer, spending time with me in the car, and we spent a few stages together, whether it was in California or Tour of Utah. Pat was always dry humor, funny. I tried to feed him many times. He always refused to eat because he was neither hungry or thirsty, which always amazed me. But he was always positive. I know that he was also a huge fan, and I'm a little biased. He was a huge fan of development in general. He was not only a great rider, I consider him also. He was also a great role model, and he was teaching in a way my riders how to deal with reporters. He was a mentor to them. He was guiding him in how to address the press, and just like unfortunately Sean Whitey left the imprint on our team, I think Pat will leave a huge void behind, and he's gone way too soon, as we all can agree on this, and he will be dearly missed, but for sure he will never be forgotten. And I would like to send my condolences to his family, all his friends, from the Action and Hagens Berman team, but from the cycling community in general. And somewhere, every time we go to a race, we will always look for Pat, but he will always be in our hearts, and maybe rest in peace.
Thank you, Axel. Thanks so much. Next, we're going to hear from one of the Peloton's prominent riders, Brent Bookwalter.
Hey guys, thanks for the opportunity. I guess just speak about Pat a little bit on behalf of the riders, the cyclists who he definitely had a big impact on. The relationship between a cyclist and a journalist can be a really challenging dynamic. We as racers depend on the reporting the storytelling and the journalism to convey the excitement and drama from our races and lives. At the same time, what is often needed for an exciting story or article can be probing, intrusive on our weaknesses, personal lives, and shortcomings. Pat was a professional who was skilled at building this relationship with a rider and finding that balance between giving the sport and fans the honesty it deserves, with consideration for who a rider is as a person as much as what we do in a race. Pat loved the sport, he loved the races, and his authentic, calm smile as he approached for an interview was a sign that he was so much more than a fan reporter looking for a scoop. Pat asked intelligent questions, he did his homework before he spoke, and he could be relied on for conveying impactful stories as opposed to simply digging for flashy headline fluff. Pat was a guy who I trusted and always performed his job with the utmost integrity and responsibility. If I had a story I wanted to tell the cycling world or a perspective that I thought needed to be conveyed, Pat was the guy that I knew would do it with intelligence, respect, and passion. Pat raised the bar for what a cyclist expects from a journalist, and undoubtedly the future stories of pro cycling that are told will be positively impacted from the legacy Pat has left. As riders, we'll all miss seeing Pat at the races, but he will not be forgotten. Rest in peace, Pat.
Thanks, Brant. Lastly, we're going to go to Guillermo Rojas. Guillermo, are you there?
John, thanks for the opportunity. I look around and all the faces here. I feel like we all have memories of Pat at a race or just somewhere within the sport. And I'm honored to call Pat a friend, and I'm honored to connect with all of you guys. And with that connection, Pat comes. I mean, Pat was to me over the years. I met Pat back in 2012 at Tour California, and to me, he was obviously more than a friend. He was a teacher to me. He was a mentor. He was also a critic. Pat wanted the truth, wanted to do so much for the sport. His passion for the sport was higher than so many people out there, and all of us here have a lot of love for the sport. I was trying to count all the different races where I either worked or saw Pat, and it's probably a lot less than all of you. It's probably 7 Tour Californias, about 7 Colorado races, and maybe 3 others, national championships, things like that. But my relationship with Pat was heavy on the phone. Like I said, Pat was my teacher. Pat was my mentor. And through all those conversations, either if I was working at Tour California or one of the races or working at USA Cycling, Pat demanded 2 things. He demanded trust and demanded the truth. And that's why when you read his articles and read his stories, you feel that, because his passion, he wanted to make sure that the truth came out. And, obviously we all know him as a professional, as a friend, but as a professional, I felt like he set the bar high. And as a friend, he set it even higher. One of the things I love about Pat, he had the rare ability to go back and forth, where he can have a conversation with you about something professional, something about the sport, but then switch over and dive into something personal and make sure that you're okay, and then all of a sudden be able to go back right to professional and back to friendship. Pat cared about every friend, rider, race director, team director. I mean, the size of his heart for this sport is tremendous. One of the last times I saw Pat was when he came here to Colorado Springs. He came to USA Cycling. He did a whole tour of USA Cycling, and I took him around the OTC. But my favorite memory was probably late night when Pat and I just sat around and talked. And, you can tell in all those conversations, what I talked about before, the truth was one of the most important things to Pat. He really wanted to make sure that a story became a story if it could actually make a difference. And he wasn't afraid ever, and you guys all noticed, of searching for the truth and making sure that he demanded the truth from everyone. So, the way I'm going to remember Pat and my legacy is that his legacy, the way I look at him, is that he was that blue-collar champion for all the blue-collar heroes. He stood up for the little guy. made sure that fair was fair, and that he demanded that from everyone. So, John, I appreciate the time, and I know all of us are hurting. So, let's reach out to each other to support each other through this.
Thank you, Guillermo. I was gonna say a little bit more from the personal side, but I'm watching the timer we have on Zoom, and I don't want to run out of time. So what I would like to do is we'll have Sean Brett come up and please lead us in a toast.
Yeah. Again, with everybody else, I'm honored to call Pat a friend, my brother. You had to have two things to be Pat's friend, and that was sincerity and respect. And that was in all aspects. Sincerity in who you are and what you do. And Pat lived that, and he expected other people to live that as well. I came to cycling late. I came to cycling as a super fan, as all people do, I'm sure. And I didn't know Pat, but we were friends on Facebook, and we ended up being roommates. And I was sitting in the media room waiting for him to arrive, and a picture of my hotel room popped up on Facebook, and it said, "I don't know who this guy is, but I'm sure I'm going to like him." And there was a great big bottle of Jameson sitting on the desk. And that's what he took the picture of. And he and I, over the years, as I explored bourbon, he explored bourbon as well. And so every time we went on tour, it was usually a different bottle of something. And Pat settled on Bullet Bourbon. And if you saw his quarantine pictures, you'll know that Pat grabbed a great big bottle and said, "I'm set to be quarantined." So this toast is about Pat, and it's for everybody else. And so if you'll raise your glass, may you approach each day with a vim and vigor. Your days be filled with a passion, any passion, and may you serve others with the same integrity, generosity, and sarcasm as Pat did. Death leaves a heartache no one can heal. Love leaves a memory no one can steal. And in what Pat thought was his native tongue, "Na zdravie," which is Czech for cheers.
Thanks, Sean. So we're running out of time on the timer. So I want to thank everybody so much for coming together for this last minute. It's been a heck of a time trying to get everything put together. But we recorded this. We'll get it on YouTube. Everybody can see it. And what I would like to do is I'm going to attempt to share my screen and show you the slideshow that I've put together to conclude with.